Imagine you're uh, trying to learn a new language, right?
Yep.
And your teacher decides the absolute best way to test your progress isn't like a quiet written exam.
Right.
Instead, they drop you right into the middle of a stadium with 80,000 screaming fans, a tied score, and a referee blowing a whistle directly in your ear.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, it sounds completely chaotic, right?
Oh, wow.
But welcome to today's deep dive, because we are looking at a curriculum design document that does exactly that.
Yeah, and it's completely counterintuitive to, well, everything we've been taught about education.
Oh, totally.
We're so conditioned to believe that learning requires a silent room, a heavy textbook, and, those perfectly sanitized tables of vocabulary, the
Oh,
one.
yeah, the classic, hello, how are you? I am fine. Where's the library?
Exactly.
We've all been there. I mean, you spend years in high school memorizing verb conjugations or clicking through some app, feeling incredibly confident in your quiet little bubble.
Yeah, your perfectly controlled environment.
Right. And then you finally step off a plane in Paris or Tokyo, and a native speaker asks you a simple question at a coffee shop, and your brain just completely short-circuits. You freeze up
You absolutely freeze.
because the neat little structure you built in the classroom totally shatters. Real language is messy.
Mhm.
It's loud. It's packed with emotion, slang, and people just talking over each other.
And that specific frees up that massive gap between the sterile textbook and the chaotic real world is the exact moment most language learners just throw their hands up and quit.
Yeah.
It just feels way too overwhelming.
Which is why the sources you brought in for today's deep dive are so mind-blowing. We're unpacking a foundational blueprint for an English learning curriculum, specifically targeted at beginner and intermediate learners.
Right.
But instead of setting the lessons in, like a post office or a grocery store, this entire curriculum is built around the biggest, loudest, most emotionally volatile sporting event on the planet, the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, the document outlines a lesson specifically titled Talking About Sport, FIFA World Cup Vocabulary. And it's essentially a masterclass in hijacking the human nervous system to make learning effortless.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to figure out how this blueprint takes the raw, unfiltered adrenaline of sports and uses it to completely bypass traditional textbook learning.
It's really clever.
It is. We're going to tear down the psychology, the structure, and the hidden mechanics of why this works. But before we even look at a single football term, the blueprint dictates a surprisingly rigid, almost theatrical setup for how the teachers have to talk to the listener.
Yeah, the document is incredibly strict about the format. It demands the lesson be structured as a casual, friendly conversation between two distinct hosts. It explicitly forbids any sort of formal, top-down lecturing.
And it assigns these two hosts very specific psychological roles, which I found fascinating. Host 1 is the knowledgeable guide. Their job is to explain the vocabulary clearly, using simple, natural, spoken language. But host 2 is where the whole thing turns brilliant. The blueprint instructs hosts 2 to ask questions, to give simple opinions, and most importantly, host 2 is specifically ordered to make mistakes.
What's fascinating here is the underlying pedagogy of intentionally programming errors into the curriculum.
Yeah, explain that, because it sounds counterproductive.
Well, in linguistics and psychology, there's a concept called the affective filter.
Okay.
You can think of it as an invisible, thick brick wall of anxiety that goes up the second a student is terrified of looking stupid or getting something wrong.
Oh, sure.
When your affective filter is high, like when you're standing at that coffee shop trying to order in a new language, your brain's defensive mechanisms kick in. It literally blocks out new language input.
Because nobody wants to sound like an idiot, especially as an adult learner. I mean, you're used to being competent in your daily life, and suddenly you're reduced to pointing and grunting like a toddler.
It's completely humiliating.
It is.
And your brain hates that feeling of vulnerability. So by forcing host 2 to stumble on the microphone, to mispronounce a word, or to completely misunderstand a football play, this blueprint is artificially lowering that affective filter for you, the listener.
Wow.
It normalizes the struggle. It sends a subconscious signal saying, look, even the person getting paid to record this audio is messing up, so you are perfectly safe.
Wait, if I'm tuning in specifically to understand English, isn't there a massive risk there?
How do you mean?
Well, if one of the hosts is deliberately saying things incorrectly, Couldn't this setup accidentally teach you the wrong thing? Like, what if host one doesn't catch it and correct it perfectly every single time? I'd just be memorizing their errors.
Oh, absolutely. That's the tightrope the designers are walking, and it requires flawless execution on the part of the scriptwriters. The mistakes can't just be random flubs. They have to be carefully engineered traps that lead directly into the lesson's learning objectives.
Ah, I see. It actually makes me think of a controlled sparring match in boxing.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, you've got host one, who is the expert coach in the ring,
Yeah.
and then you have host two, who is essentially the amateur wearing the oversized helmet and the heavy protective pads.
Right, right.
Host two is safely taking the hits, making the clumsy moves in a highly controlled environment. That way, you, the listener, sitting comfortably in the audience, don't have to take those hits yourself.
Yeah.
You get to watch the correction happen in real time, learn how to dodge the punch without taking a single bruise to your own ego.
That's a great way to visualize it. You're getting all the cognitive benefits of trial and error without any of the social anxiety that usually accompanies making an error.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it creates a totally organic excuse for the other major mandate in this blueprint. Repetition and paraphrasing.
Right. Because if a single host just reads a definition 3 times in a row, they sound like a robot. You tune out immediately.
Yeah, your brain just glazes over.
Exactly. But if host 2 makes a clumsy mistake, host 1 has a natural conversational reason to say, close, but actually it means this. And then they can paraphrase the definition. It hides the rote memorization inside a genuine human interaction.
But artificially lowering a learner's anxiety with a clumsy, relatable host only solves half the problem.
Okay.
Because if you lower their defenses and then immediately overwhelm them with a 500-page dictionary of soccer terminology, they're still going to quit.
Which brings us to the actual raw materials being taught, the core lexicon.
Yes.
Once they establish this safe conversational framework, the blueprint enforces a shockingly ruthless constraint on the actual words you're learning.
It outlines a very specific progression. The lesson starts with a short, simple introduction to football and the World Cup, just setting the stage so everyone understands the stakes.
Right.
But then it zeroes in on a strict, non-negotiable limit. Exactly 10 to 15 key vocabulary words. That's it. No more.
And these aren't just random words pulled from a hat. They are hyper-focused on specific, high-stakes action areas on the pitch. We're talking about match situations, scoring goals, fouls, and penalties, all accompanied by very simple explanations and vivid examples.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this strict 10 to 15 word limit is an act of cognitive brilliance.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In traditional education, there's this terrible, persistent habit of trying to maximize value by cramming 40 or 50 vocabulary words into a single hour.
Oh, the classic Friday vocabulary lists. Just endless columns of words you memorize at 8 a.m. and completely forget by 3 p.m.
And the reason you forget them is cognitive overload. Your working memory, the part of your brain that processes new information in real time, has a strict bottleneck.
It can only hold so much.
Exactly. It physically cannot hold that much unanchored information at once. By ruthlessly paring the list down to just 10 or 15 words, the curriculum ensures that every single concept gets enough mental airtime to actually process. But the truly clever part is what those specific 10 to 15 words describe.
The fouls, the yellow cards, the goals, it's all pure action.
Yes, they're anchoring the vocabulary to dynamic, highly visual moments. When you learn the word foul in this context, you aren't just memorizing a sterile dictionary definition like an unfair act by a player.
Right, which means nothing emotionally.
Exactly. Instead, your brain is mapping that sequence of letters to the mental image of a player getting brutally slide-tackled in the mud, the referee blowing a shrill whistle, and the crowd screaming in outrage. It becomes a multisensory anchor.
I keep thinking about the reality of a soccer game, though. Like, are 10 to 15 words really enough to understand an entire 90-minute FIFA World Cup match?
Well,
Because the sport has incredibly complex rules, offside traps, formations, and the commentators are speaking at lightning speed. Giving someone 10 words feels like handing them a tiny umbrella in a hurricane.
yeah, I mean, you certainly aren't going to become a licensed referee with 15 words. You won't be able to debate the nuances of a 4-4-2 formation versus a 4-3-3. But that isn't the goal. The goal of this blueprint is sheer accessibility.
So it's a survival kit.
A survival kit.
Yeah. If you're going into the deep woods for a weekend, you don't need to bring an entire hardware store in your backpack. You don't need a table saw and an industrial drill to survive.
Right.
You just need a few essential multi-purpose tools. A good knife, some waterproof matches, a sturdy tarp, This 15-word vocabulary list is that survival kit.
I like that analogy.
Right. Because if you understand goal, foul, penalty, and maybe a dozen other core concepts, you have the foundational tools to navigate the chaos of the gameplay. You won't understand every single word the commentator screams, but you will understand the narrative arc of a match. Who is winning, who is cheating, and who is in danger.
And grasping that narrative arc is the secret engine of language acquisition. It keeps the learner engaged. It gives them the confidence to keep listening rather than turning off the audio.
Yeah.
And the more they listen comfortably, the more their brain naturally absorbs the grammar and syntax over the long term.
But knowing the definitions of your survival kit in a vacuum isn't enough. Actually trying to strike those waterproof matches when the hurricane hits is an entirely different skill.
Very true.
The blueprint designers clearly recognize that language requires real-world context and real-world speed.
Which brings us to the application phase of the lesson.
Right. So the document explains that these 10 to 15 words are first practiced in what it calls mini dialogues. These are those slow, highly controlled conversations covering the match situations and the scoring.
Very deliberate.
Very deliberate, very safe. But then the blueprint demands a sudden, massive shift in tone. It mandates a match commentary section.
Yeah.
The explicit instruction to the hosts here is to mimic a live TV broadcast. The overarching theme dictated by the source document is that they must capture the match atmosphere, the raw excitement, the teams, and the intense emotions.
This raises an important question. Why go to the trouble of simulating a chaotic, incredibly fast live TV broadcast for beginner and intermediate English learners? Standard educational theory dictates that you should always slow things down for beginners, enunciate perfectly, and remove background noise.
It does seem completely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You spend all this time lowering their anxiety with host 2 making mistakes, and then you just blast them with a simulated live broadcast.
It seems crazy until you look at how memory actually forms. Textbook English, spoken slowly and perfectly articulated in a silent room, completely fails to prepare learners for the speed, the adrenaline, and the overlapping noise of native speakers. By transitioning from those slow mini dialogues into a simulated live commentary, they're essentially taking the training wheels off while the learner is already pedaling downhill.
Right.
And neurologically, tying new vocabulary to intense emotions like the simulated excitement of a last-minute penalty kick acts like a chemical highlighter pen in your brain.
Because of the adrenaline.
Exactly. When you experience a surge of emotion or excitement, your amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear and pleasure, floods your system with neurochemicals. It essentially flags whatever you're experiencing at that exact moment as crucial for survival. So if you're hearing the word penalty right as the crowd noise swells and the host starts shouting, your brain prioritizes storing that word in your long-term memory far more effectively than if you read it off a whiteboard.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the lesson relies on this massive intentional contrast. Think about the word penalty again. Practicing it in a slow mini dialogue is like a slow-motion dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
You're standing in an empty theater, the director is walking you through the blocking, and you're just checking your marks. Excuse me, was that a penalty? Yes, I believe that was a penalty.
It's sterile.
It's incredibly safe, but it's remarkably low impact on your memory.
Yeah.
But then a few minutes later, you hit the live commentary section of the lesson. Suddenly there's simulated stadium noise in your headphones, the host is talking twice as fast, their voice is rising in pitch. He's into the box, he goes down penalty. The referee points to the spot. That is not a dress rehearsal anymore. That is opening night. The blinding stage lights just clicked on. You literally feel your pulse quicken just listening to it. The sheer contrast between the safety of the mini dialogue and the chaotic energy of the live commentary is the hammer that drives the definition into your brain.
It forces the vocabulary to evolve from an abstract academic concept into a lived experience. You aren't just memorizing a translation anymore. You're feeling the actual context in which the word lives and breathes in the real world.
But you can't just leave the listener stranded in a state of high adrenaline.
Right, no.
That's great for a movie theater, but this is still a curriculum. They have to ensure the educational goals were actually met before you take your headphones off.
The anchoring phase. The adrenaline rush opens the door for memory, but they need a mechanism to lock it shut.
Right. So the blueprint reveals its final structural requirements. Immediately following that chaotic, high-energy live commentary, the document mandates a quick quiz for the listener. And then following that quiz, it calls for a final recap to officially close out the lesson.
The strategic placement of this quiz is really the final stroke of genius in this document. Placing an assessment immediately after high emotion content forces a psychological process known as active recall.
I've heard of active recall. It's the difference between reading a textbook chapter over and over versus closing the book and forcing yourself to write down what you remember.
Exactly. Passive review, just hearing the word goal over and over, creates an illusion of competence. You think you know it because it sounds familiar, but active recall physically alters your neural pathways.
Really?
Yes. When your brain is already highly stimulated from the simulated match environment, your neurons are firing rapidly. By abruptly stopping the action and demanding that the learner retrieve the definition of a word, forcing them to pull it out of their own memory bank, you strengthen the neural pathway to that word immensely. And then, that final recap serves as the ultimate fulfillment of the repetition mandate from the beginning of the document. It effectively cements those 10 to 15 words into long-term storage.
I keep thinking about the emotional whiplash of this, though. You spend all this time building up this incredibly fun, friendly, high-energy atmosphere. You're simulating a live TV broadcast. The crowd is going absolutely wild. The tension is peaking. And then, bam, stop everything. Top quiz.
Yeah, it's abrupt.
Doesn't throwing a test at the listener completely shatter the fun illusion they just spent 20 minutes building?
Right.
Doesn't it just remind them, oh, right, this is homework. I'm back in school?
It definitely breaks the fourth wall of the sports simulation, but it's a calculated break.
It makes me think of going to see a magician. You're at the show, and the illusionist performs this spectacular, mind-bending trick on stage. That's the live commentary section of the lesson.
Okay, yeah.
You're amazed, you're swept up in the emotion and the mystery of it. But then, instead of just bowing and walking off stage to applause, the magician immediately stops, turns on the house lights, and explains exactly the mechanics of how they palmed the card and rigged the trapdoor. That's the quiz and the recap. Doesn't explaining the mechanics kill the magic?
In a standard entertainment setting, absolutely. Explaining the trick ruins the magic for a typical audience. But remember the context here. The listener isn't just a passive audience member sitting in the dark. They are an apprentice magician. They want to know how the trick is done. In this scenario, the quiz doesn't ruin the illusion. It actually empowers the apprentice. The feeling of fluency they experience during the live commentary is fantastic for their motivation, but the quiz provides the concrete proof of their progress.
That makes total sense.
It tells them, you didn't just survive the magic trick, you actually understand the mechanics of it well enough to perform it yourself. It turns passive entertainment into active mastery.
Oh, I love that. The listener is the apprentice. That's a really satisfying way to look at it, and it brings the whole blueprint full circle.
Yeah, it really does.
We started by unpacking how this incredibly simple-looking document constructs a highly effective language lesson from the ground up. It intentionally layers a conversational, deeply flawed dynamic between two hosts to lower your anxiety and get past your affective filter.
Right.
It enforces a tightly controlled, high-action vocabulary limit, so your working memory doesn't get overwhelmed. It plunges you into emotional live TV immersion, using adrenaline to make the words stick. And finally, it uses active recall to anchor those words into your long-term memory. And the craziest part is, it manages to do all of this disguised as a casual, fun chat about the FIFA World Cup.
It truly is a masterclass in instructional design hiding in plain sight. It deeply respects the learner's cognitive load while leveraging universal human emotions.
So what does this all mean? I think it means that sports are genuinely a universal human language. The agonizing tension of a penalty kick, the heartbreak of an unfair foul, the sheer elation of a last-minute goal, those feelings don't require any translation.
Absolutely not.
Which makes them the absolute perfect Trojan horse for teaching an actual language to beginners. You sneak the complex grammar and the vocabulary in under the cover of pure adrenaline-fueled entertainment.
Which leaves us with a fascinating avenue to explore.
Oh, yeah.
If high-stakes, emotionally charged sports commentary accelerates language learning by anchoring words to adrenaline, what other high-pressure environments could we use? What other emotionally intense real-world scenarios could be the next frontier for bypassing traditional language textbooks? Imagine trying to learn financial English not by reading a sterile glossary, but by simulating the chaotic, screaming floor of a stock exchange during a market crash.
That would be intense.
Or learning culinary vocabulary by being completely immersed in the audio of a high-end, screaming restaurant kitchen during the Friday night dinner rush.
Textbooks are safe. Textbooks are quiet. But the real world is incredibly messy. And maybe the absolute fastest way to master a new language is to just dive headfirst into the mess,